Okay, so let's talk about the elections. There are a few. The Japanese far right, Takachi, she won. Um, what is your take on that?
I think it's a very disturbing development. I think it's part of the trend in Japanese politics now for actually many years. I would argue going back to the Nakasone era
Mm,
in the 1980s. I mean, there has been a continuous drift in Japan towards a more nationalist, um, anti-Chinese, revisionist
mhm,
view, and embrace a re-embrace of many of the very disturbing ideas and people that gained control of Japan in the late 19th century and led the whole of Asia to disaster in the 1930s and 1940s. The problem is there was never a proper reckoning in Japan
yeah.
after the Second World War,
Mhm,
and those views and attitudes have remained current. The emperor himself, as we know,
mhm,
was protected by the Americans and was never, as a result, held to account. Though I know from people in Japan that in 1945, the mood towards him in Japan on the part of many, many people was very angry with a strong sense that he'd betrayed them. So,
mhm,
that's another story. But
mhm.
anyway, because there was never this proper clear out and accounting in Japan, all of these people have remained in strong positions. They've passed their ideas down to other members of their families, and gradually, steadily, we see that they're regaining control. And the fact that Japan is now losing the position it has had in Asia since the late 19th century of being the most economically developed Asian country. I mean, it's been left far behind by China now.
Mhm.
I suspect is exacerbating this and is increasing hostility to China as well.
And I also saw some inside Japan, some Japanese, they're not happy with this. But some of them do say that partially is because the far right are kind of anti-immigrant, just like many other European
Yeah.
countries. That seems like an issue too, the anti-immigrant part of the party. That seems like it
Yes.
helped it. Um, Also, I feel like if you look at the turbulence in different countries, I'm not even sure she will last very long. The current one
No.
lasted 1 year, right? And then if
Yes.
you look at Korea, right, the former president is now under investigation and big trouble. He's in office maybe 2, 3 years. And even if you look at Britain, now Keir Starmer has been
Yeah.
there, but not that long. And then before him,
No.
there was also so
No.
I think that's a general like symptom now for lots of the Western countries that
It,
just
it absolutely is, and it all has its underlying cause. I mean, you mentioned immigration, and in Japan, immigration has always been a sensitive subject because
yeah.
they don't like it.
Mhm. Yeah.
But the underlying problem in every Western economy is that for decades, going back well before the 2008 crash, we
Mhm.
have been living in a period of economic stagnation. I mean, I've lived through it all my life, all my adult life. I can see it. I mean, I can remember how in the 1960s and early 1970s, living standards grew and technology expanded
Mhm.
constantly and improved people's lives dramatically. And then from about the mid 1970s, we got our first crisis then, and things began to slow down. Then there was a kind of strange, but not really very substantial blip from the 1990s,
Mhm.
which was largely connected with the economic transformation of China, just to say,
Mhm.
because it made cheaper things available and within the range of people. That is run its course, and we see the stagnation is beginning to reassert itself. So living standards are falling again. There's no real plan on how to see this thing through or even to understand why the problem even exists. And so, what is happening is that the political systems in the West are throwing up all the time more and more increasingly improbable and unlikely characters, about to say this, who come up with all kinds of easy and simple answers. Blame immigrants, blame China, do things of that kind. Have unconstrained free markets, cut taxes, increase taxes, do every kind of thing like that. Whereas what we really need in the West is a hard look at our societies and our economies and a real plan on how to reorder them. And of course, it can be done. China did it. I mean, China did exactly that, arguably, well, undoubtedly in the 50s and again in the 1980s, 70s and 80s. But we don't do that in the West anymore. We've lost the skills.
Going back to Japan, I think for Japan actually to admit and apologize for what they did during World War II, I think it's good for Japan because only then you can move on from there. I don't think it's healthy for Japan to be constantly reminded by different countries and people like this is what you did, World War II. You never recognize that. You never apologize. I just don't think it's a healthy thing for Japan. I think it's much better just to openly talk about it, apologize for it sincerely, and move on from there. I think that's much better way for Japan.
And no question, none. You are absolutely right about this. This is a deeply unhealthy, indeed, it's a sick thing. It's a sickness that you can't admit to yourself the reality of your own past. And if Japan finally came to grips with this and opened up to itself about what happened, then it would be a liberating moment for Japan. But this is the thing. The time to have done that, the best time to have done that, was shortly after those events took place, arguably in the 40s and 50s. If not then possibly in the 1960s. But that never happened in Japan. And the further away we move from those events, the more difficult it becomes, because the people who want to preserve the illusion of the wonderful golden past, they become stronger and more entrenched in the system. And for other people, well, this is history. It's things that happened long ago. By the way, what you said about Japan is equally true of Britain. I mean, Britain has never had a proper accounting of its history. We discussed this in many, many programs. And the result is that there has never been that moment in Britain when the British came together and said, look, the past is something we must exorcise and leave behind us. And we must see instead about how to build our societies and make it healthy and strong and better than it was. It's an incredible failure of nerve. We've never done this in the West, and the Japanese are following our example.
Yeah. In terms of China's reaction, it's very interesting. Now, I think at this point, the Chinese government no longer cares who's in charge of Japan or Korea. I think at one point they did pay attention. Okay, this person have this policy, and that person is more friendly or unfriendly against China. I think China probably now is confident is in its military and economic might that whoever is in charge is not going to make much of a difference in terms of China's way of handling this.
Yes.
At the same time, the netizens, I think a lot of netizens basically saying it's if you dare to fulfill what you made a promise before, which is make a huge deal between, a big fight between Japan and China. And then she also at some point even said that what is concerns Taiwan concerns Japan. And people are saying, don't you dare. When we unify with Taiwan, if you dare, that will give China the reason to do everything we have been wanting to do. So China is pretty much ready for that. So for that reason, also, I think it served Japan best to apologize and certainly not get involved in any of the China domestic issues. Stay away from it.
Absolutely. I think I mentioned to you in a program, in an article, I think it was an editorial that I read in Global Times about maybe a year or even 2 years ago, The Global Times made the point that in terms of scale, Japan's economy today has about the same scale relative to China's as Taiwan's economy did in 2000. I mean, it's where Japan towered and then was a sort of semi-equal. Now it's, and that was some years ago. I mean, it was so, and China continues to develop and grow. And Japan, by contrast, is locked in stagnation. So I'm sure that since that I read that editorial, the gap has increased. And I think that's absolutely right. I think that in Japan, by the way, I haven't been to Japan. And once upon a time, I knew many people from Japan, but I don't know anybody anymore. And I'm not in contact with anybody there. But my understanding is that in Japan, they're still in great denial about this. They still sort of imagine themselves as being on the same kind of footing as China.
Yeah.
Because it's conceptually very impossible to imagine otherwise. This, unfortunately, distorts the entire political discussion in Japan as well. It's the sense that, we've provided the Americans are there with us, and why anybody would rely on the Americans is another matter. But provided the Americans are with us, we can easily handle the Chinese. We won all our wars against them, which, by the way, is absolutely not true. But a friend of mine who's been to Japan said that is what people in Japan say. So, we are the great warlike martial nation, and we will always win out. It's a disastrously wrong view, but I think that again, a lot of that people in Japan still cling to.
Yeah, and then some Japanese think the World War II they didn't defeated by China, they were defeated by US. Well, lots of Chinese saying, well, in that case, now the US is on your side. Why don't you have a second try? Why? Right? China is absolutely ready for that. So.
You know something. Russians are saying that about Germany also.
Okay.
They're saying exactly the same thing. That most Germans believe that Germany wasn't defeated by the Soviet Union; it was defeated by the United States. That's, by the way, true. That's statistics. Polling statistics repeatedly show that now, which is incredible. So that you find Russians say, well, all right.
Yeah, why don't
try again. Try again. We're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Now, this kind of far right, kind of like not just in Japan, but Czech also had an election. There is a guy. What's his name? Babiš.
Yeah.
They call him the Czech Trump. Is that is that a correct characterization?
No. I mean, what he is a Czech oligarch. He's he's a billionaire. Remember, the Czech Republic is a small country, so by definition, it's not going to have many oligarchs. So he's very, very rich. He has a sort of populist side. He's ridden the wave. He's been prime minister before. He's obviously clever up to a point. And he's now prime minister, and he says he's going to do all kinds of things. I doubt most of which he will actually do. But from what I have heard, he's sort of spoken of himself as being someone who, in the past, who's probably quite reasonable about China and would want good relations with it. I mean, he might have said other things which are opposite to that, because that's the kind of person he was, and I wouldn't rely on it either, by the way. But he again is what the election in the Czech Republic showed was not that I think there is enormous enthusiasm for this man. I don't think there is. I do think there's huge, feeling that there's going to be dramatic change. But they absolutely did not like the previous government, which was pro-European, anti-Russian, anti-China, extremely Atlanticist. Its support has collapsed in the election. It still has some popularity in Prague, which is the capital, where you have people like that tend to concentrate. But in the wider country, there isn't much support for it at all.
The Moldova also had election not that long ago, right? And I thought the ruling party, Sandu, is that her? Yeah,
Yeah.
her party was not supposed to win, but they then ended up winning. My limited reading shows that she suppressed the votes and did something. So there's some question about that election, isn't it?
They're huge questions. And interestingly enough, there was a long article about this in the Spectator, which is Britain's leading media and current affairs magazine, more influential in Britain than The Economist is, by the way, just to say. And it actually straightforwardly said the election in Moldova was deeply flawed. That there were lots of polling stations in Europe where there's a Moldovan diaspora, but only, I think, 2 in Russia. Well, the Moldovan diaspora is at least as big. That political parties were being banned the day before the election took place, that there were problems placed in the way of people getting to polling stations. And I've heard all kinds of stories about what happened in the polling stations that were set up in Europe, that they were basically run by the governing party and that they basically wrote out the votes there. I mean, I don't know whether that is true, but that is what I have heard. It was a very, very flawed election, but Western governments were determined to ensure that Sandu won and retained a majority in the parliament, and that they pulled out all the plugs to make it happen. I should explain to our Chinese viewers that she actually lost, even on these very distorted figures, she actually lost the vote total in Moldova itself. More people who live in Moldova, even according to these official figures, voted against her than for her. The reason her party came through with a majority is entirely because the votes abroad in Europe stacked up overwhelmingly in her favor. So, they were determined that Moldova must remain loyal, and they ensured that that was what happened. It's like with Romania last year, where it looked as if the wrong person was going to win the election. So they cancelled the whole election. And by the way, Sandu said again that if the election went wrong this time, she would cancel it. So there you go. Democracy is alive and well in the West, as you can see.
She's very straightforward. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's why these elections is getting more and more. I don't know. People lost trust, for them altogether. And the New York mayor race, you heard that Eric Adams is now dropping out, mainly because they don't want Mamdani to win, so they don't want too many opponents, right, to split votes. And then there's multiple articles saying that just wait, Eric Adams is going to get an ambassadorship or some high-paying corporate job soon. So
yes. I mean, give the people the choice. Let the election happen in a orderly and normal way, but just make sure that at the end the right person wins. This is what democracy is in the West today. And of course, talking seriously, people across the West are becoming profoundly disillusioned and cynical about this.